Hello, everyone, and welcome to Matchbook Flashback. I am your host, Alec Ogg, and I've got this big collection of old matchbooks I bought at an estate sale recently. They're here in this glass jar, and the matches are all different colors and designs from all different times and places. But the thing is, when I strike each match, the flame begins to swirl hypnotically. And if you look into the flame, you can see a story unfolding in there, trapped like a memory in the matchbook. Let me grab one to kick off the show. This one says Swan Range, Montana, and has a topographical map design. You know those maps that have the lines to show elevation? It's kind of light green and tan and blue. It's pretty cool, actually. It has a little triangle showing how tall Swan Peak is. It's one of the mountains in this mountain range. And it descends to Swan River, which goes to Swan Lake, which is almost off this matchbook map. That's a lot of swans. Oh, cool. And on the inside flap here, the part that folds out above the matches, it shows a more zoomed in map of Goat Road, Goat Canyon, and Goat Creek. Looks like Goat Creek starts up by Swan Peak and travels down Goat Canyon till it merges with Swan River. It's a lot of swans and a lot of goats. But let's see if there's a story inside this matchbook. Now, when I strike the match, I need you to look deeply into the flame. Look deeply into the flame.
So actually, my story occurred in Montana, which is where I grew up. I just recently moved to Oregon, work for the counseling center. I am an avid outdoors woman. I hunt and I fish and I hike, spend a lot of time out there in the wilderness. I only have had the one encounter, though, with the Sasquatch. So, I want to say this happened about 2013 in northwest Montana in the Swan Range. The Swan Range backs right up to the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is over 1 million acres with no roads, just super rugged, thick timber, really great country if you want to get away from it all. And we were getting ready for hunting season. This was early September. It was bow season. I do bow hunt. We weren't really bow hunting. It was me, my husband at the time, and my 3 kids. We were just going to do some scouting and camp. It's still pretty warm in September before school started. And we picked just an old logging road about halfway up that range. It was actually called Goat Creek, and got set up just about dark time and cooked dinner. We had my dog with us. He was a pit bull boxer mix, and ate dinner, sent the kids to bed, got them all tucked in, and just hanging around camp, we heard all of a sudden like this really deep, resonant howling, growling. It was the most bizarre sound I have ever heard. It sounded like it was maybe a half mile away. Being an avid outdoors woman, like, I know what bull elk sound like when they're bugling. I'm familiar with the mountain lion sounds. I've had grizzly bears doing their thing in my yard. Like, it was none of these things. It was so much bigger and more resonant than any of those animals. And all the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. My heart started pounding, and I looked at my husband and I said, "What was that?" And he says, "I have no idea." And it was really spooky, but it sounded far enough away that I wasn't like overly alarmed. Just, wow, something to chalk up to the bizarre in the woods. And we went about our business, and about, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes later, we hear the sound again, only this time it is on the other side of us, about the same distance away, but to the other direction. So now we're in the middle. Interestingly, both those sounds were almost identical. Like it was mimicking, or I don't know what was going on, but they sounded so similar. And I remember that was really bizarre too. And looked at my husband again and like, wow. And so we got our rifles out because we don't know what this is. Sitting down at the campfire, just quietly talking. And we had calmed down, kind of quit thinking about it. Our dog was laying between us. He was a pretty chill dog. And he just all of a sudden, he lets out like this really vicious growl and lunges across the campfire. He was not prone to freaking out like that, and I grabbed his collar and I pulled him back, and my husband says, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh," and he runs to the vehicle. And I said, what? I hadn't seen anything at this time, and our rifles had been leaning up against the vehicle. He grabs one of those and he fires a shot into the air, and now I'm going, what the heck is going on? And I look over across the campfire and I see, just crouched down just out of the firelight, is this massive thing. It was uh, so wide. It was probably 4.5, 5 feet wide, crouched down, probably 5 or 6 feet tall, crouched as it was, just like a human being would crouch down. Definitely not a bear. And the fur in the firelight looked to be like a dark brown, reddish. It's hard to say when they're just outside of that light, but that's what it looked like. It looked to be hair rather than fur, and I could see the face of this thing didn't have any hair on it. It was shiny. It was almost black, uh, and it made eye contact with me and stood up. And as it was standing up, like I expected this thing to like stop getting taller, and it just kept getting taller and taller and taller, and I'm froze. I was just froze in place. Like, I mean, what do you do in that situation? You have never experienced that before. My kids are in a tent. I can't just take off, and my dog is shaking, not making any noise at this time, but right beside me, right at my feet, shaking and trembling, and makes eye contact with me, and it looks curious more than anything else. Like, I never felt any hostility, I never felt any aggression. It just looked really curious, and it just calmly turns around and heads back into the brush away from the fire. And the interesting thing about that is that this country is so thick. There's so much brush. There's nothing that can move through those woods without making noise. Even the little creatures, the foxes and the coyotes, make noise. And this thing made no noise. Like, it knew exactly where to place its feet and its body. I didn't hear the tree branches, nothing. And it just disappeared into the darkness. By then, like, wow, what was that? I hadn't really heard anything about Sasquatch or Bigfoot or anything at that time. I grabbed my rifle too. I'm talking to my husband, like, what are we gonna do? Should we pack up and go? Like, I think these days I would have left, but we chose not to. We realized that we didn't have enough wood to get through the night because we hadn't planned on having a fire all night. So we he says, I'm going to go get wood. I'm going to take the vehicle. I'm going to drive up and down the road. I'm going to pick up whatever I can find. You stay here with the guns and the dog. And if anything bothers you, you hear, see anything, shoot, and I'll be right back. And I said, okay, sounds like a plan. So he leaves, and I sit at the entrance to the tent with the dog, and I can smell this terrible smell, but I do not hear anything. I don't see anything. I assume at the time that maybe it's my dog because, he's a little nervous. Maybe it was him. But it was just really rank. That passes, and maybe 15 minutes later, my husband comes back into camp. He's in a hurry. He jumps out. He says, "There's something out there." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Something's throwing stuff at me. I got out of the car to pick up wood, and something is throwing big rocks at me." And I said, "You're nuts. Like, that doesn't happen. There's nothing out there that has hands that can throw stuff at you." And he says, "No, it absolutely happened." And I was like, I had too much on my mind to argue with him. So I said, "Okay." We unloaded whatever wood he had thrown in the back of the truck. We threw it on the fire, built it up as tall as we could. And both of us sat in the entrance to that tent all night long, just sitting there quietly with our rifles, and waited till daylight. As it started getting daylight and we hadn't heard anything else, hadn't smelled anything else, hadn't seen anything else. The dog had fallen asleep. We felt safe enough to lay down and get a few hours sleep. So we did that. And when we woke up, we realized that that was a really, really bizarre, potentially dangerous situation. We decided we were going to pack up camp and get the kids out of there. And so that's what we did. As we were driving out of that area, we noticed that there was absolutely no game. That was really bizarre. We went to that area because the deer population is so high that you're able to get more than one deer tag at a time. Like, it's almost a guarantee back then, in 2013, that you were going to fill your tags, and there was nothing in the area. Since then, I have done a little research trying to figure out what it was. I believe that we had an encounter with Sasquatch. I have gone back to that area. The deer population has since recovered. I haven't had any other experiences, but in my research, I have heard other people's stories of other encounters that were close to that area. So perhaps they're in there. I don't know, but that was my experience.
Wow, what an amazing experience.
It was pretty amazing for sure.
So, did your kids sleep through the whole thing?
Yeah. Yeah, they sure did.
Wow. Going back to the scream you heard initially, did it sound human-ish? Did it have any human tones to it?
Yes and no. Like, the way it started with that deep, deep growl was not within the capacity of a human voice to do. But the way it rose into that howl, like, we could mimic that. However, it was just so much bigger, and the range was so much bigger than a human person can do. So, but it was human-like, yes.
Yeah, and to hear a deep growl from a half mile away, that's crazy.
It was. You could almost feel it. Like, it was just, yeah, it was the most intense sound I've ever heard come out of the woods.
And so when you saw this thing across the firelight, how close were you to it?
I'd say 10, 12 feet, because
Wow.
the fire had died down. There wasn't much light at that point.
And you said it was about 6 feet tall when it was squatting down?
Squatting down, crouched down. Yeah, it was so big.
Do you feel comfortable giving a guesstimate on how tall it was?
When it stood up all the way,
Yeah.
uh, 8.5, 9 feet tall. It was so big. And I hear other stories of Bigfoot being like 7, 8 feet. No, this was bigger than that for sure.
Do you know if it was a male or a female?
I have no idea. I didn't notice, like, I've heard female Sasquatch sometimes have breasts and things. I didn't notice any of that. It was pretty dark. So
When your eyes met it, what did its eyes look like?
its eyes, so uh I mean, they looked kind of like mountain lion eyes, honestly. Round, kind of goldish, with the center pupil, not the slits like cats have, but mountain lions have that center pupil. Um, Not very much white to the eye at all, just a yellowish brown,
Did the nose look like a human nose or more like a ape nose?
more like an ape.
Okay. Yeah, are there any other features of its face that stand out?
Um, Not really. I mean, I didn't see its teeth. I just noticed, I remember that it was that facial expression of curiosity I find really interesting, that it could be so expressive. And maybe I misread it, I don't know, but just to have the ability to express emotion is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so did you get a sense that there was intelligence behind it?
Absolutely.
Did it seem more like an animal or more like a human, or just a mixture of both?
It seemed more like, I mean, it's so weird to say, but it definitely seemed more like a human. Um, it seemed like it just wanted to see what we were up to, and it didn't mean us any harm. And then when it realized that we were alarmed, it just quietly left, right? And to me, that seems human. That seems compassionate.
Yeah. And so this thing was 5 feet wide, 9 feet tall, and yeah, it was completely silent going back in the woods.
Yeah, yeah, in thick, deep timber, which is pretty crazy.
Man. Did the proportions of it, I mean, if it's 5 feet wide, obviously the proportions are not like a human, but did the length of the arms or the length of the legs to you, I don't know if you remember those details or not, but did it look like human proportions?
Mm, um, I remember that its upper body was probably like ours is about half and half, right? And its legs were shorter than a human proportioned legs would be. Its arms had been kind of like on its knees, and when it stood up, they stayed like basically at its knees. So
So it had pretty long arms.
pretty long arms, yeah.
When your husband fired that shot, if I'm getting the order correct here, he fires the shot and then you kind of see it and make eye contact with it.
Yeah, I didn't know what he was doing. My eyes were on him because he says, oh my God," and runs towards the vehicle. And it wasn't until he fired that shot that I started looking around, wondering what it was that he was seeing that would cause him to respond in that way.
So it didn't seem to really even acknowledge that he had just fired a gun. It was looking at you.
Yeah.
What does your husband make of this? What did he say about it?
He um he doesn't want to talk about it. he he does not want to talk about it. He didn't see it like I did. So he I mean, he's seen whatever he saw, but he did not make eye contact with it, and he did not see it stand up like I did. He had grabbed that rifle, fired that shot. By then he was standing far enough back at the truck, that he couldn't see it as well as I could. So I have told him what I saw. I told him that I seen it stand up. But he didn't see any of that part, and he just kind of refuses to talk about it.
Okay.
I think maybe he thought it was a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It absolutely was not a bear. I have seen so many bear.
Right. And bear don't tend to throw rocks.
Right.
Yeah. You hear about them throwing rocks and stuff all the time.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe there were two, to hear one on both sides of us, and then for me to smell what I had smelled at the same time that rocks were being thrown, at him collecting firewood. Maybe there were two in the area. I only seen one.
Did it ever make you nervous about your kids playing in the woods or anything like that?
Well, like I said, we packed up the next day. Daylight helped us feel a lot safer, to be honest. I have never camped in that area again. I've gone back during the day and it's been fine, but I have never camped in that area again. And even in other areas, I am a lot more mindful of where I camp, how I'm prepared, and I have taught my kids to be that way as well.
After seeing this thing, did it change your worldview at all?
I've always been pretty open minded. Uh, I mean, when you have an experience, I guess some people go into denial and they just deny that that's a thing. But for me, I've always been pretty open-minded. I don't by any means think that I know everything. And it definitely sparked a curiosity in me that I hadn't had before on these sorts of things.
Did you tell your kids about it?
Not at the time. They were pretty young. I have told them since, and they think it's a pretty great story. My youngest is now 17, and so he's got Sasquatch research stickers all over his truck. He's into it. So,
If you hadn't had one of these experiences and you were like listening to your story, what would you say to someone who is skeptical about these things in referring to what you saw?
mm, I think I would say, I would wonder if they had mistaken it for another creature, and the only thing that could possibly have that sort of maybe that sort of size would be a grizzly bear. But then considering the fact that I am very familiar with the wildlife in Western Montana and grizzly bears and the sounds that they make and just my background, I'm so confident that that is not what I encountered. I would just hope that it plants a seed of curiosity in their hearts and minds as well.
Well, as you can see, the match has gone out. I wonder if some of this lingering smoke here in the room came from that family's campfire there in the Montana mountains. I wouldn't have been brave enough to get more firewood after a sight like that, but I hope you enjoyed that Swan Range Sasquatch encounter as much as I did. And I can't thank you enough for being here with me. And if you'd like to support this young, little, growing show, please text a link of this episode to someone who you think might enjoy it as well. Or give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen. It just takes one click and it really helps this show grow. By the way, if you or someone you know has an unusual story, send it my way. My email is alec@parasaur.co. It's spelled out in the show notes. Thank you again for stopping by, and I hope you come back next week because I have another match to light.